All right. Perfect. Hello, everybody. I'm Athra Mathur, the Director of Legal Research at the Center for Art Law, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our event on fakes and forgeries to discover how an art detective unravels the truth. Now, before I introduce our wonderful speaker for today, and as per usual, I wanted to introduce you to the Center for Art Law and let you know a little bit about what we do. So we are a Brooklyn-based research and education nonprofit, and we're dedicated to offering resources and programming to advance the arts and law community. Through our website, our newsletter, our events, we disseminate information and we try to keep our audience updated on everything art law, whether it's news, cases, publications, movies, and a lot more. So we facilitate tons of conversations by hosting and participating in events such as ours today. And of course, this doesn't even begin to cover everything that we do. So we invite you to subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already to receive updates. You may also consider becoming a premium member to receive offers and discounts for our upcoming events, as well as access to our case law corner, our articles, and the recordings of our past events. I am very excited to announce that we have a ton of events coming up. And so sorry, just a reminder to keep the microphones muted during the session. But yes, we have an in-person event in New York on digital art happening tomorrow. We have our immigration clinic where we pair attorneys and artists together for one-on-one consultations. We have an art law colloquium on immigrant contribution to the arts, a workshop on the O1 visa. And we have our Art Law Conference 2023 happening in person and online at Fordham University Law School as well. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence, copyright, commission agreements, contracts, anti-money laundering, and a lot more. So these are all up on our website. Please take a look, and we hope to see you at all of them. A few of the usual housekeeping items. This program is being recorded for archival purposes, but as I mentioned, we'd love to see you. So please feel free to keep your cameras on and microphones muted for the time being. Once the video recording is available, I will send across a recording of the session, the handout and materials, and a survey for the event as well. And if you have any questions for our speaker, we will be having a question and answer session. So you can put them in the chat box, and we love for these sessions to be as interactive. So please feel free to enter all of your questions in the chat box. Now, finally, coming to our program for today, we have Douglas Bort with us, who is the founder and lead investigator of Odyssey Global Consulting. Prior to this, he spent 21 years as a special agent with the U.S. Customs Service and Homeland Security investigations. He is a subject matter expert in the investigation of art and cultural property crimes. He's conducted many complex international investigations, undercover operations, and he's trained many other law enforcement personnel on how to investigate art and cultural property crimes. You can read his full bio and the many things he's done and that he does in the handouts for today. And without any further ado, I will hand it over to Doug, who will take it away. Thank you so much, Doug.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Yes, again, thank you, Atreya, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Doug Bort. I want to thank the Center for Art Law for inviting me to share with you. And thank you all for your valuable time in joining us today. As Atreya said, I'm the founder and lead investigator of Odyssey Global Consulting. Prior to that, I spent 21 years as special agent with the United States Customs Service and Homeland Security investigations. The last 10 years of my career were focused on the criminal investigation of stolen art and cultural artifacts. Specialty skills that helped me to further these investigations included the setup and operation of an undercover operation. This platform allowed me to conduct undercover operations involving artworks, ancient coins, and many other commodities. I'm going to go ahead and try and share screen now. Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay. In this session, Fakes and Forgeries, I'm going to share some of the information I learned from these investigations and from the experts I consulted in various fields. I'll be focusing on fakes and forgeries in fine art and how some of the most prolific forgers fooled experts for decades. I'll also discuss how a very talented indigenous artist was exploited by unscrupulous individuals in the industry who set up a network to fake his works and sell them to unknowing customers. In addition, I'll provide some indications of when an object's authenticity or provenance may be suspect and how I determine when fine art may be faked, forged, or stolen. Sorry, hang on.
Worries.
Okay, hang on. Yes. There we go. Sorry about that. So let's talk about two important terms and how I'll be using them in this presentation. A fake will refer to an original work created in the style of a certain artist, but not a copy of a single work. However, the work is still purported to be by the famous artist and not claimed by the actual artist. On the other hand, a forgery is a copy of an original artwork that is purported to be the original work. You should also look for and examine any signatures on the artwork, as this is another element in a fraud showing an intent to deceive. I'm going to move this up. Okay, fake paintings have been created by many an artist, but for this talk's purposes, I'm going to concentrate on only a few, and we're going to start with fake paintings purported to be by the actual artist, William Aiken Walker. William Aiken Walker was born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1839 and exhibited his first oil painting at the age of 11. He continued painting until his death in 1921, and by some estimates painted over 2,000 works. Early in his career, Walker painted traditional subjects, including still life paintings of game and fish, scenes of Charleston, and portraits. After the Civil War, he found his niche painting scenes of the lives of emancipated slaves in the rural South. One of the features occurring frequently in Walker's paintings were cabins. These became a popular theme in paintings purported to be by Walker, and subsequently, one of the ways the paintings were discovered to be fakes. The painting on the left is an authentic Walker painting. The painting on the right is indicative of many of the fake Walkers that were produced. Look closely at the chimney in both pictures. The chimney on the left leans away from the house at the top and is held up by two poles. Chimneys of the day were built of resinous pine branches and daubed with red mud or clay. They were purposefully constructed to shift away from the house as they gained height and supported by large poles to keep them from falling over. In the event of a fire in the chimney, the poles could be kicked out and the chimney would fall away from the house, thus preventing the entire home from burning. The chimney on the right is straight and against the house like modern chimneys, with a couple of small poles leaning against it. Walker painted the chimneys as they actually looked at the time, but the modern fakers painted them like modern chimneys with a couple small poles leaning against them because they didn't understand the originals. Another way of detecting the fakes is pigment testing. Many of the modern fakes used age-appropriate canvas and frames to further their schemes, but used some wrong pigments. Now, moving on to another forger, let's talk about Mark Landis. Mark Landis is unique among art forgers in a few ways. He doesn't fit the standard profile of a charlatan working for material gain, or an embittered artist seeking to punish a world which failed to appreciate him. Landis was diagnosed with schizophrenia as a teenager, although caseworkers have recently suggested bipolar disorder may be a more appropriate diagnosis. While in therapy due to his father's death, he discovered his affinity for painting. It has been said of Landis that if you put only a blank canvas in front of him, that he could do nothing with it. But if you put a master painting in front of him as well, that he could recreate that work on the canvas within a few hours with amazing precision. Landis didn't use sophisticated techniques to fool experts. His canvas and frames were not old. He aged his works with tea or light brown pigments and used coffee and other techniques to make the frames appear older. He did, however, forge auction receipts and labels that he affixed to the backs of his works. So what was his motivation? In 1988, Landis donated a fake painting to a museum in memory of his father. The admiration from the museum and his mother motivated him to continue. Here, Landis explains his motivation in his own words. In the next couple decades, Landis continues to create forged artworks that he copies from art history books and auction catalogs, and he donates them to many museums across the country. More than 45 museums were known to receive donated paintings from Landis. In fact, he created multiple copies of the same forgery and gave them to multiple museums. He relishes the positive attention he receives. He embellishes his cover story, develops more aliases, and even dresses as a priest to enhance his credibility. Because he donated the works to the museums, they probably didn't scrutinize the works as closely as they would have if they had been purchasing them. Between 2008 and 2010, the FBI becomes aware of his activities. An investigation was conducted, but criminal charges were never brought against Landis because he never profited from his schemes. He had given all the paintings to the museums for free. Once Landis's scheme comes to light, a couple of things happened. Landis was included in a traveling exhibit titled Intent to Deceive, which was shown in 5 museums in 2014 and 2015. Landis now has a website where people can request a painted portrait commission, giving him a legitimate outlet for his talents and desire to be liked while helping to promote mental health awareness. In the spirit of full disclosure, I own an original forgery painted by Mark Landis of Winslow Homer's Girl Picking Clover. The original is in the Canton Museum of Art here in Ohio. Landis painted the forgery for the museum to auction off during the Intent to Deceive exhibit at the museum, with the proceeds going to the museum. The color differs in the forgery from the original due to the photograph the museum sent Landis to copy, and not because of his abilities. On a last note, a documentary about Landis titled Art and Craft is available on various platforms if you would like to learn more about his life and activities. The next forger I want to discuss is Elmir Dahori. Elmir Dahori was a Hungarian-born painter and art forger who is said to have sold over 1,000 art forgeries and fakes to reputable art galleries and museums all over the world. Dahori attempted to make an honest living as an artist, but nobody wanted his original works. Claiming that he was a displaced Hungarian aristocrat, Dahori was able to fool buyers into thinking his family had numerous original works by Picasso and other artists that he was selling. He formed a partnership with Jacques Chamberlain, who became his art dealer. They toured Europe and worked together selling fakes and forgeries until Dahori discovered that Chamberlain had kept most of the profits that they were supposed to split evenly. After more failed attempts to sell his own works, Dahori begins selling fakes and forgeries again, this time including paintings by artists such as Matisse, Modigliani, and Van Dongen. These were sold to numerous museums and placed in their permanent collections. Buyers become suspicious, and Dahori uses several aliases to sell his paintings. During this time, Dahori is also pursued by the FBI and flees to Mexico. After a failed attempt at suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills, Dahori met another con man named Fernand Legros. Dahori begins a business partnership with Legros, who starts selling the paintings because Dahori was too well known. Now we'll look at his techniques and motivation. Elmir Dahori was very confident and had an uncanny ability to discern and copy the styles of master painters. He coupled that with the use of contemporaneous materials to perpetuate his fraud schemes. He would purchase cheap 19th century paintings to acquire his canvas for forged works from that era. He would then scrape off the paint and use the canvas for his forgeries so that the age would match if tested. He would also use varnishes to age his forged works. His forgeries of more contemporary artists and works on paper didn't require special canvases, only his expert hand. Legros was just as adept at forging the provenance and documents for Dahori's works. He bribed experts and copied certification stamps and custom stamps. He even went so far as to insert photographic copies of Dahori's works into auction catalogs. Modern techniques and testing of the pigments can detect the fakes and forgeries created by Dahori if properly examined. Now we'll look at Dahori's work. The painting on the left is Portrait of a Polish Woman, 1919, by Amedeo Modigliani. The painting on the right is a fake by Dahori in the style of Modigliani, painted in the 1950s, which was on display in a Miami museum for decades as an authentic Modigliani. A close-up of the signatures is shown as well. There is even a story of a fake Kees van Dongen painted by Dahori that upon inspection, Van Dongen thought was his own work. His early motivation was money, but later it included the above quote from Elmir himself. One unnamed museum is even said to boast of an important collection of post-impressionist paintings that in reality were all done by Elmir. So what happened with our famous faker? Elmir Dahori wound up on the Spanish island of Ibiza. There he met American author Clifford Irving, who wrote Dahori's biography, Fake, the story of Elmir Dahori, the greatest art forger of our time, which became an international bestseller. In his 1973 film, F for Fake, Orson Welles immortalizes the fraud and duplicity by both Dahori and Irving, which attracts more unwanted attention from law enforcement authorities around the globe. France finally secured Dahori's extradition, and fearing he would be killed in prison, Dahori committed suicide on December 10, 1976, by overdosing on sleeping pills. An interesting anecdote on Dahori. Later in his life, he created more of his fakes, but signed them Elmir instead of the signature of the artist he was copying. These actually started selling, and soon he was faked by another faker who also signed the paintings in the artist's name on the recto and Elmir on the verso. Now, the last of these famous, infamous fraud artists that I'm going to talk about is Eric Hebborn. Eric Hebborn was an English-born painter and art forger. He attended Britain's most prestigious art school, the Royal Academy of Arts, and had the ability to become a great artist. In 1963, Hebborn formed Panini Galleries Limited in London, England, and began selling many of his faked and forged drawings attributed to Whistler, Bartolozzi, School of Mantegna, and others. He does this to reduce his personal liability for selling his forged works. The gallery also uses the same conditions of sale that other galleries of the time did to protect themselves from litigation for selling fakes and forgeries. He just happened to be the one creating the paintings as well as selling them. In 1964, Hebborn relocates Panini Galleries to Rome, Italy. Hebborn disdained the politics and arrogance of the establishment art world. He saw no moral dilemma in selling fakes and forgeries to experts who earn their living on being able to distinguish the genuine from the spurious. Hebborn also had his own unwritten moral code that I'll show you in the next couple slides. This code says a lot about his motivations and justifications for the hundreds of fakes and forgeries he inserted into the market. It appears that Hebborn did actually abide by this moral code. He would often feign ignorance and say a work was possibly attributed to a different artist than the one he was faking. The expert would examine the work and often come to the desired attribution on his own, thus absolving Hebborn of creating the expert attribution that he wanted all along. Hebborn obtained a drawing attributed by experts to Bruegel the Elder, complete with a label stating such on the back of the frame, which was itself very old. He decided to create a forgery of this drawing. This slide shows what it cost him for the materials to create his forgery. He examined the original carefully to determine the order in which he should draw each line and practiced the strokes with a dry pen. After completing his forgery, he carefully removed the original from the frame and replaced it with his forgery, taking care to put the frame back together nail by nail exactly as it was. He then burned the original. This is Hebborn's forged Bruegel, which was sold to Kolnagis and hung in the Metropolitan New York for decades as an authentic Bruegel. It was exhibited in Italy in 1972 and 73 with many renowned artists and officially added to the oeuvre of Bruegel the Elder in 1966. Incidentally, Hebborn believed the framed Bruegel he bought to be an engraver's copy and not the original Bruegel due to the hesitation in the line drawing. So although he believed he wasn't destroying an original Bruegel, he couldn't be sure. And since he burned the original, we can't compare it with his forgery. He was known for replacing authentic works with his own and keeping the originals stashed away. Over the next 3 slides, we'll look at some fakes by Hebborn. Since these were fakes and not forgeries of original works by the artists, we have no comparison pictures. Pictured is a Hebborn fake of Giovanni Benedetto Castiglione, titled A Young Oriental and His Horse, made in 1968 and sold by Christie's. This slide shows a Hebborn fake of Mantegna, titled The Lamentation of the Three Marys, made in 1965 and sold to Kolnagis. And this is a Hebborn fake of Peter Paul Rubens, titled The Entombment, made in 1967, and sold to Hans Kallman. In March of 1978, Hebborn came under scrutiny. Hebborn admits that his early works were not as good and should have been detected by experts at the time. He was careless in his early days in the making of collector's marks. Once one of his works came under suspicion, more of the works he sold were questioned. Let's take a close look at the young Oriental and his horse again, which sold at Christie's in 1968. It has not been copied from anything and is thus an original work of art. We have to examine a work with a discerning eye and learn to ask why. In this instance, why is the horse's left hind leg scarcely indicated? Because Hepburn was avoiding the damage already existing on an old sheet of paper, which is visible in this close-up. If the paint was drawn over the holes, it would have shown that the artist was using a sheet of paper already damaged by time. But avoiding it is clear evidence that the 17th century paper had not been employed by a 17th century painter. A close examination of the anatomy of this horse should also have shown that it wasn't the work of the Genovese master, as Hepburn was not adept in the anatomy of horses at this time. On April 17, 1980, Hepburn sent a letter to the Times, which caused further embarrassment to the establishment art experts. Between 1963 and 1978, Hepburn had created at least 500 works that were put into circulation, of which only 25 had been seriously doubted at the time of his first book, titled Drawn to Trouble, published in 1991. By the late 1970s, he was much better at faking old masters and decided to add insult to the injury he had already caused the establishment. Even though he was exposed as a forger, he vowed to continue his activities until he had put an additional 500 old masters into the market, making sure that none of the works could be traced back to him. Eric Hepburn wrote a second book titled The Art Forger's Handbook, published in 1996. It was extremely detailed in how to create fakes and forgeries, and even had a chapter devoted to avoiding legal trouble while doing it. I would recommend reading it if you're interested, and I'd be glad to discuss it with you if you reach out to me. Shortly after publishing The Art Forger's Handbook, Hepburn is murdered on the street in Rome. His murder remains unsolved. So now that we know the charlatans are out there in many forms, how do we differentiate authentic from fake? It's estimated that up to 40% of the art in auction houses and museums is faked or forged. Spend time closely examining artworks and learn as much as you can, and the experience will follow. Artist foundations and estates used to provide authentication services. Now only about 15% do this. A catalog raisonné can be a great tool, but only as good as the expert who compiled it. And you'll find more than one catalog raisonné for the same artist that don't agree on various works. Even asking the artist directly isn't always proof, because they've been known to deny an artwork they've actually painted for various reasons. The internet has allowed access to resources and books that were harder to find in the past, but can also contain false information. The right expert is another great source of information. We've already discussed many cautionary tales concerning so-called experts, though, and even true experts can be wrong occasionally. I recommend finding an expert who is thorough, knowledgeable, and has no financial stake in the outcome of the examination. The documentary Made You Look is a great example of so-called experts who made faulty attributions on very suspicious artworks because they had a financial stake in the outcome being positive. Also, experts can give their opinions too soon and then be hesitant to take back those opinions when new evidence emerges for fear of being embarrassed. None of this is meant to imply that expert opinions are worthless, quite the contrary. But the conclusion should be based on collaborative examination of all available information. Expert connoisseurship combined with technical examination of the artwork by a qualified laboratory. All documentation available should be examined by both an expert on paper documents and an expert such as myself to conduct a full investigation into the piece the people, businesses, and the places involved. After the experts complete their work independently to allow creativity, they should collectively discuss all findings, exchange ideas and concerns, and come to a joint decision based on the available evidence. This is the approach I would recommend. Examination of all documentation provided with an artwork is just as important as examining the artwork itself. I can't go into great detail about the undercover platform I used or the crooked galleries I was investigating because those cases were ongoing when I retired. But I can say that by digging into the provenance and authenticity documents provided, and by knowing what to look for, I was able to debunk the authenticity of suspect artworks independent of the expert examination of the artworks themselves, which also concluded that they were fakes. Finally, one of the most important aspects of my work as an art detective is the vast network of trusted experts that I've accumulated by conducting these investigations for over a decade. Experts in all areas of artworks, artifacts, coins, and other areas are specialists, and I always seek out the best expert for the specific item or items I'm investigating. My network includes experts with knowledge in all areas I've discussed today and many other types of fine art and antiquities. Next, I want to discuss a case of art fraud and how the principles I use can be applied to it. This is not an investigation that I personally assisted with, but will illustrate and reinforce what we've been discussing. This fraud involved the artist Norval Morrisseau. Morrisseau, also known as Copper Thunderbird, was an indigenous Canadian artist from the Anishinaabe First Nation. When he started painting, he was originally criticized by the Native community because his images disclosed traditional spiritual knowledge. Morrisseau was a self-taught artist. He was the founder of a Canadian-originated school of art called Woodland, or sometimes legend or medicine painting, where images similar to the petroglyphs of the Great Lakes region were now captured in paintings and prints. He developed his own techniques and artistic vocabulary that captured ancient legends and images that came to him in visions or dreams. He was also referred to as the Picasso of the North and respected by many other great painters. His later style changed. He used a more standard material and the colors became progressively brighter, eventually obtaining a neon-like brilliance. The themes also moved from traditional myth to depicting his own personal struggles and his changing spiritual beliefs. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you some of Norval's authentic artworks painted at different times. This one is titled Blue Loons, painted in 1973. This one is titled Ojibwe Shaman Figure, painted in 1975. And this one is Shaman Speaks to All Creatures, painted in 1989. And here we have Sacred Eagle, painted in 1990. And finally, Transforming with Grandson, also painted in 1990. So now that we've seen some authentic Morrisseau paintings, let's look at some fakes. This is an image of the painting that set off a series of events and years-long court battles. It eventually exposed how a group of unscrupulous dealers and certain other individuals exploited Morrisseau and some of his closest friends and family to make millions. Kevin Hearn, pictured here along with the painting, is a member of the rock band Bare Naked Ladies. Kevin is one of the good guys in this, by the way. Kevin purchased the painting titled Spirit Energy of Mother Earth from Joseph McLeod and Maslach McLeod Gallery in 2005 for the price of $20,000. The gallery claimed it was an original painting by Norval Morrisseau. Let's look at the provenance provided by Maslach McLeod Gallery to Kevin. The first item I want to point out to you is the date of July 10th, 2010. Remember, Kevin purchased the painting in 2005. Kevin, like so many buyers, didn't ask for the provenance when he purchased the painting. It wasn't until 2010, when Kevin's painting was part of an exhibit at the Art Gallery of Ontario, that he was informed that his painting was being removed from the exhibit because it was a fake. Kevin then approached Maslach McLeod Gallery, demanding the provenance and his money back. These are the responses from the gallery. There are many issues here. Reputable galleries will stand behind their sales, and stating that there are no fakes also shows the gallery's indifference to the art and their customers. So now Kevin has to hire an attorney and attempt to prove the painting is a fake. So where does one start? Let's go back to our team approach method. Remember, expert connoisseurship is part of our team approach. In this case, Gerald McMaster, who was the head curator of Canadian art for the AGO at the time, informed Kevin Hearn that the painting was a fake. So let's look at the other two parts of our team approach and discern what they might tell us. I'm not aware of any laboratory analysis that was completed on this painting, but we can discuss some possibilities. Technical examination of modern art is more difficult because the same materials used by the original artists are still readily available to the fakers. However, if unusual methods or materials are used by the artist with consistency during particular times, these may indicate fakes or forgeries. Knowing how Norval Morrisseau painted, I would have looked for fingerprints in the paint, as he often used his fingers when painting. The third part of our team approach involves examination of all the documentation and investigation of all the people and places involved. In this case, much evidence was gained from doing this. I want to delve into some of the information discovered during this case study involving both the civil trial and a subsequent criminal trial. I don't have time to go into every detail, but there is a documentary titled "There Are No Fakes" that will provide you with more information if you're interested. Before talking about the details in this case, I'm going to discuss a few tips I've learned over the years from interviewing thousands of people for various reasons. The first is the purpose of the interview and investigation. Is it a civil or criminal proceeding? The burden of proof is different for both. So the information you need to achieve your goal will be different also. Criminal proceedings require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and most require a knowledge element when it comes to culpability. Civil proceedings have a lower burden of proof, known as the preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not. What else do we want to do prior to the interview? Gather as much information as possible about both the subject you're interviewing and the facts involved. Know the subject's criminal history, employment history, and history with any other subjects involved in the investigation. Dig into their social media. That can be a huge source of information. And know as much as possible about the facts involved in the incident. Opinions and statements are important, but can be untrue. Facts can always be used to catch suspects in a lie. Find and make a connection with the subject you're interviewing. Rapport and a connection will encourage the subject to talk, and you want to keep them talking. Keep in mind there's a big difference between connection and compassion. I've interviewed many victims, and you want to show compassion when talking to a victim because they need to know you care and that you want to help. I've also interviewed many child molesters and others suspected of heinous crimes, that I didn't feel compassion for, but you still need to make a connection of some kind. By learning how to read people, you can determine their thought process concerning the incident and find a connection, which leads into my next point. Discover what motivates the subject, both within and outside of the incident involved. You can use that motivation to get more information from the subject, but also to determine truthfulness of their statements versus another subject when there's a contradiction between their statements. Motivators can be financial gain, revenge, a desire for justice, and many others. Keep motivation in mind as we look into the information and interviews concerning the subjects involved in this case. Let's look at the provenance provided by Maslach McLeod Gallery again. It starts with the artist. That's normal. So let's start with Rolf Schneider. He was a well-known collector in the Thunder Bay area, so it's possible. However, when interviewed, he stated that he'd never seen the painting and never owned the painting. Robert Voss is the next name. They couldn't prove he even existed, although a David Voss does appear in this story as someone implicated in the fraud ring. Finally, we have Irving Jacobs. He was also interviewed and stated that he had never seen or owned the painting. So this provenance is a big factor in his investigation, and I'll point out a couple reasons why later. We've already been introduced to Joe McLeod of Maslach McLeod Gallery. We've heard some of his statements. His motivation is obvious: money and the reputation of his gallery. A lawsuit finding that he had sold a fake painting could also cause many of his other clients to question previous sales and cause him serious financial harm. Now let's meet Randy Potter and see what the investigation yielded. Randy Potter ran an auction and by his own account sold between 1,500 and 2,000 alleged Morso works. Morso works made up 80% of his auction revenue, which was between $1 and $2 million per year before the scandal broke. Potter also stated that he sold the Spirit Energy of Mother Earth painting in dispute to Joe McLeod in 2004 for $2,500. Joe McLeod certainly didn't list Randy Potter on the provenance document. Looking at motivation again, I believe Potter did sell McLeod the painting. This information also shows an overt action on behalf of McLeod to commit fraud that the trial judge should have weighed heavily in favor of Kevin Hearn. The judge didn't, but I'll get to that later. Here's Jim White, an art dealer in the middle of this. By his own statements, 100% of his business is Morso. This is Joseph Otavnik. He owned at least 50 of the contested Morso paintings. He certainly wouldn't want the fraud to be exposed because it would drop the value of his paintings by many thousands each. He was also heavily involved in litigation of anyone fraud. More on that soon. So we've met some of the rogues gallery in this case. Let's meet some of the people who exposed the fraud. We've already been introduced to Kevin Hearn. Kevin's motivation went beyond trying to recuperate his money. He actually spent more money trying to bring the fraud to light than he lost on the painting. He was also motivated by trying to help those others who were defrauded but didn't have the means to pursue justice, and also by a desire to preserve Morso's legacy and the quality of his work. The next subject we'll meet is Richie Sinclair. Richie was a protege of Morso, who spent a lot of time with him between 1979 and 1981. During this time, he learned a lot about Morso's techniques. Richie set up a website called morso.com where he uploaded pictures of over 1,000 paintings for sale purported to be authentic Norval Morso works that he said are fakes. Many of the fakes used a different technique than Norval used. Norval would sketch the work first, then fill in the colors, then the black lines last. Many of the fakes painted the black lines before the colors and used different colors than Norval. Also, many of the fakes were signed on the back with a dry brush technique, along with a title for the painting, a year, and a copyright symbol. Norval didn't do this, and not one known authentic painting contains this on the back. Needless to say, this website set off a proliferation of lawsuits by individuals who had a financial stake in the fraudulent paintings. Remember Joseph Otavnik? He ended up suing Sinclair and Kinsman Robinson Galleries, who became Norval Morrisseau's exclusive dealer from 1989 until his death in 2007. He also sued Sinclair's friend, Sinclair's lawyer, the lawyer's wife, and basically anybody who said the paintings are fake. He'll probably get served next week after this presentation. So we've met some of the key players. Let's see what the investigation revealed about where all these fakes came from. Many are purported to have been painted in the 70s, and we've discussed some of their similarities. Remember, Randy Potter admitted to selling between 1,500 and 2,000 paintings. He claimed that David Voss, who was previously unknown to him, showed up at his auction house with a trunk full of rolled up Norval Morrisseau paintings. Voss claimed that his father, Dieter Voss, had thousands of Morrisseau paintings that had been sitting in a storage unit for decades. Voss further claimed that his father was a prison guard at Kenora Jail, where Norval Morrisseau was imprisoned, and that Norval had painted thousands of paintings and given them to Dieter. Voss then proceeded to sell Potter the paintings 8 to 10 at a time out of his trunk for months. I haven't counted the number of red flags that pop up when I heard that story, but there are a lot. No reputable auctioneer would buy those paintings without further verifying the source. But I believe Potter made the story up because he knew the true origin of the paintings. So let's go over a couple of things I would do to verify this story. Prison records show that Norval was in Kenora Jail, but only for a 6-month sentence. Hardly enough time to produce thousands of paintings. They also indicate that no guard by the name of Dieter Voss worked at that prison during the time in question. An interview of Bob Fox was conducted. Fox was a fellow inmate and friend of Norval while in jail with him. He confirmed that Norval was allowed to paint occasionally and given a few supplies to do so. However, he contends that Norval only painted about 30 paintings during the 6 months he was inside. Fox also stated that one doctor bought all of those paintings and the money was used to buy Norval a house when he got out. It might seem ironic that an inmate is more believable than a supposed legitimate businessman, but not when we consider the motivations and compare both stories with the facts and common sense. There are some sketches on green prison paper that Norval actually made while in prison, in addition to the 30 paintings. He planned to paint them after he got out. This brings us to another key player. I can't give Dallas Thompson the time he deserves, but he's one of the bravest people in this story and sheds light on the actual origins of the many fakes because he was in the inner circle of the fraud ring. Dallas was an acquaintance and eventually indentured to Gary Lamont. Lamont was known in the Thunder Bay area as a drug dealer and sociopathic criminal who was also implicated in at least one murder. His father was a friend of Norval's, and Gary used Norval's feelings of loyalty towards his father to exploit him and others. Dallas testified that Lamont used drugs and alcohol to exploit Norval's nephew, Benjamin Morrisseau, and another indigenous artist named Tim Tate, who started creating paintings for Lamont. Lamont would later add Norval's syllabic characters to the front of the paintings, as well as the dry brush information on the backs. Lamont then sold them to many of the art dealers involved in this story, including David Voss, Jim White, and Randy Potter. Although Potter claims to have never met Lamont, Dallas spoke of a time when Potter and two others flew into Thunder Bay and paid Lamont $126,000 in cash for 30 paintings. Tim Tate has since identified numerous paintings that he painted that Lamont later added Norval's syllabic characters to. Benjamin Morrisseau denied any involvement in the fraud, but was one of the 8 people recently arrested in this fraud ring. Aside from his role in a fraudulent art ring, Lamont was also involved in other criminal acts. He regularly used drugs, alcohol, and threats to exploit indigenous members of the Thunder Bay area. He was convicted in 2016 of 5 counts of sexual assault when Dallas and other victims came forward. He was sentenced to 5 years incarceration. After his release in early 2022, he was arrested twice for sexual assault within a few months. He was also one of the 8 subjects arrested recently in this art fraud ring. So what was the result of Kevin's lawsuit? Well, believe it or not, the court found that although the judge believed the fraud ring did exist, there wasn't enough evidence to say that Kevin's painting was a fake. Luckily, on appeal, that decision was reversed and Kevin was awarded $50,000 in judgment. Now that we've seen how the fraud was perpetrated, what has or is being done to protect Norval Morrisseau's legacy? Around 2001, in response to the flooding of the market with inferior fakes bearing his name, Norval and his manager began identifying fake paintings they found online. Norval, through his attorneys, signed a series of sworn declarations identifying numerous fakes by name and gallery, many being sold by the players we discussed. The dealers attempted to claim Norval was mentally incompetent at the time, even citing his son Christian Morrisseau as a witness to that. However, Christian and others contradicted that assertion by saying that even though Norval was suffering from Parkinson's disease, that he was mentally competent and sharp until his death in 2007. The Norval Morrisseau Heritage Society was established in 2005 and was given exclusive right by Norval to determine the authenticity of any works purported to be his. It is made up of expert volunteers with no financial stake. Finally, I hope that the recent arrests of 8 individuals in this fraud ring will lead to justice for the victims and the protection and restoration of Morrisseau's legacy as a very talented indigenous artist. This slide provides information on how to contact us and contact at Odyssey Global Consulting. The website contains more information about our licenses and services, as well as links to some of my top cases. The QR code is a link to my digital business card. If you point and capture that, you can add me to your contacts without having to manually enter all of my information. You can then send your information back to me also. It's been a pleasure to meet you and speak with you today. If we don't get to your question or you want to reach out to me, please feel free to contact me anytime. I'd love to hear from you. I also plan to attend the Art Law Conference on April 27th in New York City and can also be contacted then. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Doug, for such a fantastic presentation. All of the examples and you taking us through the minds of some of these artists and forgers was really incredible. We really appreciate you taking the time out and speaking with all of us today. We do have a good number of questions that came in. So just in case some of you may have to hop off if it goes on for a little longer, the session is being recorded and I will be sending across a recording of it to you along with the handout and materials. But Doug, thank you once again. Some of the questions that came in. What happened to the artworks that were bought by and gifted to the museums when DeHori and others were exposed?
So that would really depend on the institution that had and owned the artworks. Many of them chose to destroy the artworks. Some have kept the artworks, but now taken them off of exhibit, and plainly label them as works by Dahori. So really, it kind of just depends on the institution. I know that the estates and many of, if you send them a painting that they deem as fake, they will keep it and you will never get it back, and they basically destroy it. So.
All right, thank you. Another question that has come in: if a painting is identified as a fake or a forgery, is it possible to identify the forger?
So that's a very good question. Sometimes we can, because even forgers, fakers have their own styles, have their own materials and techniques. So at times we can determine which faker was responsible for that work. At other times, the main goal is just to determine if it is or isn't a fake. So you don't pursue it further after that. It really just depends on the project.
Thank you. Another question: you mentioned that one of the forgers was not charged by the FBI because he didn't profit from the faked works. So what is the standard of culpability? Do you have to have gained financially?
So in order to be charged criminally for fraud, there has to be some sort of material gain, not just a intrinsic type of gain. So yes, that is actually one of the elements of the crime, is showing how the person who committed the fraud gained either financially or through some material aspect in committing the crime. And if it can't be shown, or if in Landis's case it was never there because he never profited from them, then they can't pursue criminal charges for the fraud.
Thank you. Are you aware of the use of forgeries or fakes as tools in other frauds, such as collateral?
Yes, there have been instances where fakes and forgeries have been used both in legitimate and illegitimate ways as collateral for loans. As also they've been used in insurance fraud cases where they will end up creating a fake or a forgery, and that will be the one that's destroyed in whatever manner the fraud is taking place, and so that the perpetrators then get the insurance payout, but also still have the original artwork, which can be stored or sold on the black market to somebody else. Obviously, it would be very difficult to display it again because it was supposedly destroyed, and that would be on record. But it has been used in both legitimate and illegitimate cases.
How interesting. Thank you. In your experience, do you think museums are interested in knowing that their artworks are actually fakes?
That's a good question. It's a loaded question. It really would depend on the museum. So many museums, their operation is based on their reputation. And also, the board members of many museums have a lot of say in what goes on in the museum, as opposed to just the experts. So, I would say that really that would depend on the individual museum. I know that there are a lot of museums that they have some very talented and knowledgeable experts working within their walls, and they care about what they have in their exhibits. They care about what they put on in for the public to view. But there are also museums who really don't want to find out because it makes them look bad. It makes their experts look bad. It makes their institution look bad. If they have been displaying a work for over a decade, as in the authentic Modigliani, only to find out that it was a fake all along. So a lot of museums don't even want to go down that road.
Thank you. And have you worked with different auction houses, or do you frequently work with them to inspect the lots before auctions?
So I have not been called on in the private sector by auction houses to review any of their items prior to sale. It is a service we provide, but a lot of auction houses, they don't either want to put out the resources or the time, so they fall back on their disclaimer that this item was provided with this provenance by somebody that we're not going to tell you who provided it, but we're going to sell it. And if it turns out to be a fake or a forgery, then they'll deal with it afterwards. I think that a lot of auction houses don't want to know beforehand. And I know that a lot of the cases that we worked when I was a federal agent involved auction houses who maybe didn't do as much due diligence as they should have ahead of time. So we had to put a halt on the auction or the exchange of the item if the auction had already taken place in order to complete our investigation.
Right, thank you. And I know we're a couple of minutes over time, but I think this is the last question. Is it incumbent upon the buyer to do a high level of investigation, as you were mentioning, on the provenance?
So it always is in our market, in the art market, in the way that we conduct business. It's kind of a buyer beware. It always has been. So yes, I would behoove anybody who's looking to buy anything, especially if it has a high price tag, to make sure you either do some due diligence ahead of time or, call us to help you with that. But there are, if it's a reputable seller and they find out later that it was a fake or forgery, most of the time the buyers can get their money back. The problem is they don't usually find out for a very long time, if ever, that what they're possessing is actually a fake. And the other times, as we've seen in these examples, sometimes the seller, the gallery, the auction house, whoever, just says, no, I'm not giving you your money back, prove to me that it's fake. And then you have to take them to court, and then it's a whole other process and very costly in its own right. So yeah, I would recommend anybody wanting to make a purchase to do some due diligence ahead of time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doug. And I think that sums up the questions. And in case anybody else would like to get in touch with Doug, in the follow-up email, I'll send across his details as on the slide here, so you'll be able to do that. Doug, I think I speak for everyone in the audience to thank you for this incredible presentation. And you've already got a ton of comments on the presentation and how fascinating the examples, the stories, and your storytelling was. So it was really, really appreciated. And I really hope that we'll see everybody else at the Art Law Conference as well. Doug is going to be there, so that's another reason to join in person. But thank you once again, Doug. This really was fantastic, and it's always interesting to hear about it from your perspective, more than just the legal field, but how what goes on in the minds and how you can actually detect fakes and forgeries and just the difference between them as well. I know I learned a lot. It was a wealth of information, and I'm really excited to have you all at more center events, and you'll receive the recording and the handouts once again by email. We did send across a survey in the chat box. We'd be very thankful if you could fill that out, let us know your thoughts about the session, and let us know what you would like the Center for Art Law to cover next. We're always looking for exciting topics and presentations that we can provide for you. So I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you once again for attending, and thank you so much again, Doug, for this presentation. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Atreya, and thank you everybody for attending. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.